If you make a good product, everything else kind of falls into place after that.
Welcome to the Lush Life Podcast. I'm your drinking companion, Susan Schwartz, and I bring you the how-to guide for living life one cocktail at a time. Thanks to my mother's love of martinis, the first words I spoke were shaken, not stirred, and I've been obsessed by cocktails ever since. Together, we'll learn from bartenders, brand ambassadors, distillers, and others why certain drinks are popular in certain cultures, how to make the perfect old-fashioned, when to shake and when to stir, and so much more. Hear that sound? It's time to cozy up to the bar and let the fun begin. Our guest today always loved the stories. That's why he went in for a degree in history. Now Pete Garraway, brand ambassador of STARWARD Whisky, spends his days telling one particular story of why you should be drinking Australian whiskey. It's not hard to convince them once they've had a sip of the award-winning whiskey born and bred in Australia. He joins us today to tell us his story, having just returned from Singapore, a place that brought back all sorts of memories for him.
I was quite lucky, really, growing up. My dad was in the army, so I moved around all over the world when I was a kid. I think I was born in England, but moved to Germany when I was about 6 months old. Was there for a couple of years, then moved to Belgium for a few years, then went out to Hong Kong for a few years, and then back to Germany before moving back to the UK. So I guess by the time I was 10 or 11, I'd been lucky enough to experience so many different cultures and go to loads of different countries and things. And obviously that wasn't quite the start of my drinking journey, but certainly food was an interesting thing growing up.
How old were you, say in Hong Kong?
I was about 6, 7.
Okay, so still quite young. Where do you remember? Yeah. Like, what is your first recollection?
I was just over in Singapore last week, actually, and the rain started coming down. And I said to my girlfriend, "Oh, this reminds me of living in Hong Kong, because when the rain came down like this in Hong Kong, I used to run up into the hills, into the monsoon drains, and chase snakes." She just looked at me and said, "Oh, wow, that sounds safe and interesting."
I kind of think it sounds romantic.
Yeah,
but
there you go. So that's one of my memories. But yeah, absolutely, just going down and. Fried rice was my big thing. They called it chow fan was the dish that we always used to go and eat. So that's an abiding memory of living over there as well. And just the smells you get, so all the spices and everything that comes across on there.
And of course, Germany is completely different, though.
Yeah, hugely. And I was at an army school as well when we moved around, so you had kids from all over the world, all different nationalities, all sort of thrown together into these schools. And yeah, Germany was actually, we were living over there when the Berlin Wall came down. So I remember my dad taking me up to Berlin just a few weeks after the wall had come down, and we were there chipping away with a hammer and chisel, bringing down bits of the wall, and these sort of East German policemen stood there with their guns looking at us, and thought, a few weeks ago this would have been very different. But yeah, so some amazing experiences growing up. For sure.
And so where did you then end up, say, your teenage years?
Yeah, sort of moved back to the UK, and I guess my sort of real passion for spirit started when I was at uni up in Leeds, and a bit like quite a few people, I guess, got a bar job to pay the bills whilst I was at uni, and was fortunate enough to work with some pretty amazing guys. And I rapidly realised that I was a terrible bartender, but really loved the stories behind spirits in particular. But just the drinks industry in general. And we used to get guys coming in, but similar to what I do now, really, and coming in and telling us the stories of their range of drinks. And so yeah, after that, I sort of moved down to London and got into the drinks industry.
But why do you think during your university you were attracted by a bar job as opposed to any other job?
Yeah, good question. I guess my first ever job, I suppose, was flipping burgers in a halfway house on a golf course. So I've always worked in hospitality over the years. right down to that. And I remember, sitting there making bacon sandwiches for guys as they came in, and just wanting to be in the real clubhouse, working behind the bar. I thought that was where all the fun was, and I graduated to that afterwards.
Which we know it is where all the fun is, right?
Exactly. And when you're serving drinks for guys, especially in a sort of golf club environment, was quite interesting, because you got members coming in who they'd want their specific pint in their specific glass. Some people had it in a jug, or some people had it in a tulip glass, or whatever it might be. And you had to remember, because if you ever served these guys the wrong beer in the wrong glass, they'd be letting you know about it. And but yeah,
any whiskey drinkers?
A few, yeah. I mean, I guess we'll touch on it a bit, but growing up, whiskey was always sort of very much a man's drink, an older man's drink, probably as well. People drank it neat and sat there and sipped it, and were very specific again about the particular whiskies that they would have. And I think luckily things have changed on that front a little bit.
Yes, absolutely. From a bourbon drinker. Yeah. Now, when you were at Leeds, what were you studying?
I was studying history. So again, I guess I've always had a bit of a passion for a story, or knowing where things came from and how things have developed.
So how did you start? Like, you graduated, you had this history degree.
Yeah.
You kind of knew that you wanted to do something in spirits.
Yeah.
Where do you go for?
I was a bit of
from there.
A lost soul, I suppose, for a while. I was just sort of working in bars, trying to work out what I wanted to do, and hopping around between a couple of jobs. And I guess my first proper job in the drinks industry was with Heineken, or Scottish and Newcastle as it was back then. So I was doing new business contracts for them down in London. And that was really interesting, because you dealt with everybody from a working men's club down in southeast London right to a private members club in Mayfair. So again, you got to meet so many different types of people, see so many different types of drinkers as well, and have to work out how do you pitch for a particular person's taste, or what they're into. Especially
using the same liquid.
Yeah, exactly.
Such different people drinking the same thing. Yeah. You would think that they would have a lot in common. You know?
Absolutely.
You could tell them the same story.
Tell them the same story in a slightly different way, put a different twist on it, and there's always somebody's going to find some part of it interesting, and whether it's that's the key, I guess, is finding the part of the story that people get excited about.
Mm-hmm. So after beer, you could have continued into beer, but then
I actually
I love that you laugh.
Yeah. This is I can laugh.
Trip down memory lane.
A trip down memory lane. Absolutely. I moved on from Heineken on. I went to set up a business of my own with somebody who was a friend of mine. Let's put it that way. And
haven't we all done that?
Yeah. Well. I rapidly learned that he maybe wasn't as good a friend as I thought he was. And a couple of years later, I was not unable to pay the rent, and just staring down the barrel of having to think of what
hopefully a barrel of whiskey, not a barrel of anything else.
That's when whiskey's always been my friend in those sorts of scenarios. There's very few things that a decent bottle of whiskey won't make better. But yeah, fortunately, a very good friend of mine was working at Fentimans at the time, and I bumped into him at a dinner. He said, "Look, we don't have anybody in London at the moment. We're looking for somebody." And just kind of grabbed him by the shoulder, said, "Take me, I'll do it, please." And went to work with them.
Now, Fentimans is non-alcoholic.
Absolutely.
Right.
Absolutely. And that's what I thought. I thought it's going to be a nice move for me. I'll move into the non-alcoholic world, and this will surely be healthier. But actually, with the way the mixer industry has moved on in the last sort of 5 years, it was a great place to be, because you got to spend all the time with all the different categories, whether it's mezcal, tequila guys, whiskey guys, gin guys, obviously. So I got to go around with all these amazing brands and see people coming up with unique serves and different flavor profiles. And again, sort of took me back. That's when I kind of rediscovered my passion for spirits, I guess. I sort of remembered what was so amazing that
through Fentimans.
Absolutely, yeah.
Well, listen, I'm allergic to artificial sweeteners, so when I go for a Pimm's, I rely on Fentimans, the lemonade.
Excellent news.
To be the bar,
lemonade, absolutely.
And if they don't have it, then I can't really have the Pimm's.
Okay,
because artificial sweeteners in a lot of lemonades.
Yeah, sure. Yeah.
So Fentimans has always been my friend.
Oh, good. Yeah, no, it's great. Great company and amazing products. And Eldon Robson, who started that business, it was all about the flavour. That was his big passion, and something I certainly took away from working for those guys was if you make a good product, everything else kind of falls into place after that. Focus on making the best thing you possibly can, and worry about everything else later.
Mm-hmm. And so, what drew you away from there?
Axiom Brands, I guess. So Ian and Catherine, who set up Axiom Brands, I've known them for a while. They started with Belsazar Vermouth was their sort of first product. So with the vermouth and tonic serves, they were sort of the first people who were really pushing that and getting people to go onto vermouth and tonic. So working for Fentimans, I met them through that and recognised that there were two people who have a huge passion for the industry, massive drive, amazing work commitment. And when they called me up back end of last year and said, look, we've probably bringing on a new brand, it's something quite exciting, would you be interested? I almost didn't need to hear what the brand was before I said, yeah, I'm absolutely interested. And then, when they told me it was Starward and put me in touch with David Vitale, founder there, and had a bit of a chat with him, it was a very difficult decision, because I was very much enjoying my time at Fentimans. It was a great company and great people to work with. But sort of when opportunities like this come along, you take them.
And it was spirits.
Yes, exactly.
It was spirits. It was whiskey, which had been your friend, right? Yeah,
absolutely. I was, trying to play devil's advocate a little bit, and sat down with my girlfriend at the time, and we were weighing up the different options of what I should do. And I just remember her looking at me in the eye and going, "Pete, a whiskey company's just offered you a job. Let's stop kidding ourselves. We both know what you're going to do here." And we just had a laugh and said, "Yeah, absolutely."
So, what has your relationship with whiskey been?
To be honest, I, a bit like everybody else, I thought whiskey was always sort of an after dinner drink, or I remember a few times at university it got me through some difficult times. I think Lefroy was the first whiskey I really fell in love with. Mm-hmm. It's a bit like, I remember the first time I ever had a sour beer as well. It's just one of those products that you drink and go, wow, what is this? What's different? But I think because of how whiskey's made, it's got a story. And regardless of what the distillery is, you can always learn about before you even get on to trying the liquid. There's so much to hear about how the whiskey's being created, what grains are used, what barrels are used. And obviously with some of the Scottish distilleries that have been going for a long time, the history behind it all really drew me to whiskey more than maybe other spirits. Mm-hmm.
And it's very rare someone creates a whole new history for a whole new country, making a drink that is associated really with such a specific place in the UK.
Yeah.
So when you got the job, did you have to, I assume, go down to Australia and see what made this specifically Australian?
Yes, absolutely. I mean, I remember actually asking David that question when I went to the distillery, and I said, I guess I'm going to have to learn a lot more about the Australian whiskey market in general. And he said, you know what, mate, it's not even really about that. We just make amazing whiskey. So
see, I've had my hand slapped. It's not about that.
Yeah, exactly. It's like lesson one from David Vitale.
And you're like, well, I need a story.
Yeah.
I'm the brand ambassador, I need a story.
Exactly. But it was great to see. I mean, that's going back to the sort of story of why David started Starward. He walked into the Lark distillery, which is down in Tasmania. There's Bill Lark being sort of the godfather of Australian spirits, if you like. He was the first guy to get a distilling license.
How long ago was that?
That was 1992, I think, that Bill started at the distillery, and David was
so relatively recently.
Absolutely, yeah. It's sort of this he had to fight the government a little bit like the Sipsmith story over here. There were rules and regulations about the size of the stills that you had to get a distilling license, and it wasn't until, as the story goes, Bill was on a fly fishing trip with a friend drinking a bottle of scotch and thought, why aren't we making whiskey in this country anymore, especially down in Tasmania? And so he lobbied the government to change the rules on the still sizes and set up the Lark distillery, and kind of the rest is history, I guess. So, well, although you say that, but over here, still people do look at you with a bit of a quizzical Australian whiskey. Are you sure, really? And there's over 30 distilleries, I think, now down in Tasmania, and it's reached onto the mainland now as people are starting to explore a lot more with the craft world. But sort of David was originally a craft beer lover. He was a bit of home brewing, and his idea was to start an organic brewery down in Tasmania. But being the ambitious man that he is, he always he wanted to make a distinctly Australian brand, a uniquely Australian brand that he could take out to the world. It was never his ambition to have a little business. It was always to take it global. So he realised quite quickly that good beer doesn't travel too well. So it was a friend of his that sort of tapped him on the shoulder down in Tasmania and said, I think I might have something for you. I'll introduce you to my friend Bill. And I'm sure David didn't realise what he was walking into, but he went to meet Bill Lark and walked into the Lark distillery and saw this amazing place, and suddenly realised that there was a craft whiskey world as much as there was a craft beer world. Fell in love with the idea of it, started working for the Lark distillery, worked there for a few years before moving back to Melbourne, where he's from. Very proud of being from Melbourne, and started STARWARD over there.
And let's say you keep bringing up, distinctly Australian. So what makes this so Australian? Yeah,
well, that was very important for David when he was starting the business, because some of the early Australian whiskies would have things on the label like Australian whiskey made in the finest of Scottish traditions. And David thought, if I'm going to drink something in the finest of Scottish traditions, there's a little place called Scotland that's already doing that pretty well. And he thought, if we're going to get people to drink Australian whiskey, we need to give them a reason. We need to have a reason to exist on a back bar alongside Scotch, Irish, American. They're already making amazing whiskies. Right. Why are people going to drink Australian? So initially, he was going to use bourbon casks, just like 95% of the whiskies around the world do. And we've actually just launched our bourbon cask release, so that's quite fun, trying that and thinking, what might have been. But he rapidly realised, why are we bringing ex-bourbon barrels from the other side of the world all the way to Australia when we have some of the best wineries in the world right on our doorstep? And there are very few distilleries in the world that are lucky enough to have all of the ingredients they need to be making amazing whiskey within a day's drive of the distillery. So regardless of where whiskey is actually distilled, people will import grain from different countries, they'll import barrels from different countries. We're lucky enough to have 100% Australian barley, all within a day's drive of the distillery. And as I said, some of the best wineries in the world right there on our doorsteps. We're able to work very closely with wineries and source these barrels. And that really gives us, David's very fond of saying, actually when you think about it, STARWARD is more Australian than Scotch is Scottish, because all of the produce is right there on our doorstep.
Them's fighting's words.
Yeah, absolutely. But, he said that in Glasgow once, and it didn't go down very well.
So you've got, but you guys make I'm saying you as Australians, even though you're not Australian. All right. You do a lot of different kinds of wines. Where do you start? Do you, there's...
Yeah, I mean, good question.
There's a lot of different grapes down there.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we started with a Perra, which is Australian sherry. It wasn't until 2011 that it stopped being called Australian sherry, quite rightly, as sherry should be made in Jerez, but mainly because I guess whiskey had always been aged in fortified wine barrels, so they sort of knew that would work, and it's it's Australian wine barrels. But I think always from day one he wanted to explore, he wanted to experiment and really push the boundaries of what whiskey can be. And always had in his mind that, you know, when you talk to people about Australian wine, nobody says, oh, a Perra.
Right.
Everybody says Shiraz, right? Everybody says, you know, big Australian red wines. So I think that's always where he was thinking of taking the business. It's certainly the future of the business now. That's what we're going to be focusing on a lot more, because unfortunately, a bit like everywhere else in the world, not enough people are drinking enough sherry as well. So these Perra barrels are becoming harder for us to source. So that certainly plays a part. But yeah, big Australian reds are quite iconic. And we thought, you know, if we can use these iconic barrels, hopefully, you know, we can make a pretty iconic whiskey with it as well.
Because it could have all gone terribly wrong, because it takes a long time to make a whiskey. It's not like your gin, you know, it's not like tomorrow you can have it and taste it. You know, it could have overpowered it. There could have been a billion things that went wrong. You know, how long into the process did you guys think, you know, we're into something that's working?
Yeah,
this is going to be good.
I mean, because of the way we age the whiskies as well. So we use a Solera aging system. So we put our new make spirit into the barrels, and Melbourne has a very unique climate within Australia. It's famous for having 4 seasons in a day. So we get massive temperature swings up to 12.5 degrees just within a 24-hour period. So that means that the spirit is constantly expanding and contracting in and out of the wood, and we get a lot more interaction with the wood over a shorter period of time than you would do somewhere with a more level climate. But that also means that, you know, it's vital that the guys are going around doing their taste analysis on a daily basis, checking how the barrels are going. And I remember David saying to me when I was over there that when he originally sourced these Shiraz barrels, originally from the guys at Yalumba up in the Barossa Valley, as the trial for what became our wine cask and will become Nova next year. You know, the guys put the new make in, and they were trying it, and is this going to work? Is this going to work? And yeah, he said he remembers the day when the guys looked and went, "It's okay, mate. It's good. It's good. It's going to be good." Because you know, I'm sure you'll speak to David when next time he's over, but he's certainly got some stories about how it was certainly not all plain sailing setting up a whiskey business. That's for sure. And that's why we launched our 10th anniversary bottling as well, which I think there's still a couple of bottles of that available. But you know, it was a celebration of the fact that Starward hadn't gone under in 10 years, because it's certainly not smooth sailing opening a whiskey distillery. When
did they think, okay, we think we have an award-winning product, this is it, you know? Do you think it was from the first, you know, the first expression of it? You know, this is exactly what I wanted to make, you know?
Yeah, I'm not sure. We're always pushing ourselves, and you know, I think that the team are always striving to do better. So I'm not sure they'd ever say that this is, you know.
Well, you started winning awards, you know.
Yeah, well, huge. I mean, you know, David said to me when I started, he said, you know, the question isn't whether we can make great whiskey. We know we can do that. Look at the Tasmanian whiskies that are out there. They've already been winning incredible awards. So he got the right people in place. He got the right team in place to come in. So I don't think he was ever really that worried about the quality of the whiskey. He always knew he could make something great. It was whether or not we could get people to drink Australian whiskey and get the whiskey out there and take it to the world with pride. I mean, he showed me the business plan that he wrote back in 2007, and you know, said, I want to create a distinctly Australian whiskey that we can take to the world with pride. And under that was, you know, we want Starward to be on every self-respecting back bar in the world, and that's the challenge, rather than necessarily making a great whiskey.
And I guess that's your job, is to tell that story.
No pressure. Yeah.
So have you had people who said, oh, no, Australian whiskey, I'm sorry, get out of here? Or have they pretty, you know, hey, come on, I want to try this? And
it's been, you know, absolutely the best brand I've ever worked on in terms of reaction from people. As soon as people hear the story, as soon as people try the product, they're sold. So it's just that question of getting in front of the right people, telling them the story, and get them to try the liquid. I've been going around to a lot of consumer shows this year with the guys at the Whisky Lounge, everything from Liverpool down to London, and you know, you definitely get people walking past with a bit of a look on their face. Australian whiskey? Are you sure? Come in, my friend, listen to our story. And you know, by the time they've walked away, they feel that they've learned something about how whiskey's made, because we have to tell that story about local produce, about local barrels, because it's such a crucial thing about Starward as a brand. And actually a lot of drinkers don't realize some of these things about, how bourbon barrels tend to be used for whiskey. So they walk away, feeling that they've learned something about whiskey and enjoying the liquid as well.
So should we go try some?
Absolutely.
Okay, I can't wait. After we shared more than a thimbleful, I decided to make sure you got an explanation of each of the expressions we tried, so you can decide for yourself which one to start with. Why don't you tell me about each of the products that you have and what you should experience when you're drinking them?
Absolutely. So we started with our Solera, which was launched back in 2013, which is aged in what's called Apera casks. Nobody knows what Apera is. Apera is just Australian sherry. It was labelled as Australian sherry up until about 2011 when, quite rightly, they were told they can't call it sherry anymore.
But isn't it shortened for aperitivo?
Absolutely. Yeah, exactly. I'd have liked to have been in that marketing meeting of who decided the name was going to be.
They're like, okay, we need it really now. Okay, aperitivo, apera, there it is.
Exactly. But yeah, Australian style sherry. So, same grapes, same process. And some of these beautiful old barrels have been in these wineries for decades, using this to be maturing this fortified wine. So we're lucky enough to have sourced these barrels, which we then recooper into different sizes, and we rechar the barrels as well to get different flavors of the different sizes of the barrels. Pop our new make spirit in there, and our new make is made from, as I mentioned earlier, 100% Australian malted barley, which we can source within a day's drive of the distillery in Melbourne. And we use our own blend of brewer's yeast with some distiller's yeast during the fermentation process to create our new make, which is more like quite a fruit-forward eau de vie style of new make rather than sort of a heavier style that you might get in some Scottish whiskies. So we've always been a fruit-driven whiskey. And when we pop that new make into the wine barrels, obviously that then emphasizes the fruit style of the whiskey. And the Melbourne climate is a big part of what Starward becomes, because it's famous for having its 4 seasons in a day. Temperature swings, a very variable climate, which really forces the new make to interact with the wood a lot more over a shorter period of time than it would do in a more temperate climate. So that drags all of these beautiful Australian wine notes right out of the wood and into the whiskey. So with the Solera, because we rechar the barrels as well, you get some of the caramelization of those sugars in the wood. So you definitely get a bit of a creme brulee note to the whiskey. For me, I get a lot of orchard fruits, a little bit of banana, which actually comes through in both of the whiskies for me, because that comes from the strain of brewer's yeast that we use to make our new make spirit. So that's almost a bit of a signature style in both of the whiskies. Whereas with our wine cask, which will be called Nova as of next year, but our wine cask expression, where we originally sourced some Shiraz barrels from the guys at Yalumba up in Boroughs Valley. We now have a range of wine barrels from all over South Australia, but predominantly Shiraz barrels is what we use, first fill Shiraz, and we're looking very much for that signature Australian red wine note that comes through in the whiskey. And unlike the Apera barrels, which we recooper and rechar, with the wine cask barrels, we do as little as possible to those at all, minimum intervention. So they've had red wine in them the day before, disgorged with red wine. They get sent to us overnight if possible. We might steam them to clean them up a little bit when they get to the distillery, but other than that, our new make spirit goes straight in there when the wood is still soaked with red wine. So when the Melbourne climate does its thing and the spirit interacts with the wood going in and out of the barrel, it pulls all of that gorgeous Shiraz, all of that gorgeous red wine notes right out of the wood and into the whiskey. So on that expression, you can really see it in the color of the whiskey. It's got a gorgeous rose gold color almost to it, and obviously all whiskey gets its color from the wood, but our whiskey gets a lot of its color from the wine that was previously in the wood as well. And on the nose, there it's just a lot of red berries. And a little bit of that spice that you'd expect from a big Australian Shiraz, but that's sort of mellowed out a little bit in the whiskey barrels. It's interesting to see how that affects it.
And you have one now that's with American oak,
yes,
right?
we've just launched our bourbon cask expression. Absolutely. Well, the guys have a lot of fun in the distillery. I mean, we'll have to get you out there at some stage. We have what's called our New World Projects releases. So that might be anything from different barrels. So we've got single fill Shiraz casks, obviously, and single fill cognac PX sherry that they put in there as well. We have some jackets on our stills, so they can play around with different styles of actually during the distillation process as well. But yeah, we've just launched the bourbon cask release, which I think we're getting 16 cases of in the UK. So it's certainly a privilege to be able to drink that one and try it.
It'll be a hot product. I'll have to try that, definitely.
Yeah, absolutely. We'll have a tasting session.
Good.
It was great to have Pete on the show. He left me with a bottle of their new product, the new old-fashioned, distinctly Australian as well.
We're big believers in whiskey having its place at the dinner table, encouraging people to drink more whiskey with food. And, sometimes if you just take a bottle of whiskey along to a dinner party, people look at you a little bit funny. But actually, if you can bring on a nice bottle of old-fashioned, then it goes down pretty well. So yeah, we wanted to make a distinctly Australian take on it. So we use our own wattled seed bitters to create our bottled old fashioned, which is a bit of a lighter style of old fashioned, but beautiful to have on a nice sunny day with a barbecue, or on a nice winter's day as well. Goes down very well. But Starward putting their name onto a bottle cocktail just shows how confident we are in the product, because in Australia, obviously, we're a pretty big brand there. So when people see that Starward have brought out a bottled cocktail, they'll come and have it. Because in the UK it's slightly different. There's been some hits and misses, I think it's fair to say, with the bottled cocktail world. So we weren't actually sure whether to bring it over initially, but it sold so well over in Australia that we thought, we've got to bring it over and do it. And I was just at the Leicester Whisky Festival last weekend, and we sold out of it there when consumers were trying it. So yeah, like you say, it's one of the most popular whiskey drinks. It's one of the most popular cocktails in general. It's been the best-selling cocktail 4 years in a row. So for us to bring out our own version is pretty exciting.
You can find this in my shop at alushlifemanual.com/shop. Since you can buy their old-fashioned already made, I thought I would have a different cocktail as my cocktail of the week. Our cocktail of the week is the Mac Sly Grog. There's a little history lesson of Melbourne in this one. It's a cherry ripe riff on the Manhattan, inspired by the borough of Fitzroy in its bygone days, when gangsters slung under-the-table grog, and the MacRoberston's chocolate factory dealt out their sweet goods from Kerr Street. Stir all the following ingredients over cubed ice in a mixing glass. 40 ml of STARWARD wine cask, 15 ml of Belsazar red vermouth, 10 ml of Jack Rudy cherry, 5 ml of Mr. Black's coffee amaro, 2 dashes of cacao and macadamia bitters, and 2 dashes of Angostura bitters. Strain into a Nick and Nora glass. Then spritz an orange zest over the top and then discard. And then finish it off with a cherry. You'll find this recipe and all the cocktails of the week on alushlifemanual.com, where you'll also find all the ingredients in our shop. Can you believe that next time will be my 100th episode? I truly cannot. I have you to thank for supporting Lush Life Podcast and alushlifemanual.com. As a huge fan of the reunion show format, I thought I would meet up with a few of my former guests to see what they've been up to since we last had a chat. I'll be sitting down with Tom Soden, Fabiano Latham, Anna Sebastian, and a few others. Catch up on where they were by listening to the past episodes, and drop in next time to see where they are now. Until next time, bottoms up.
Thanks for listening to the Lush Life Podcast, the sister of A Lush Life Manual. For more information and links to everything you heard, plus a bit more, please visit alushlifemanual.com. Always remember the wise words of Oscar Wilde. All things in moderation, including moderation. And always drink responsibly. Okay, I said that last part. Theme music is by Steven Shapiro and used with permission. Lush Life is produced by Evo Terra, and I'm your hostess, Susan Schwartz. I'll see you at the bar.